Kia ora, everybody, and welcome to Cobblestones Chronicles. I'm delighted to be here again, letting you know about what's going on at Cobblestones. But before I start, I want to say Happy Valentine's Day. And to celebrate Valentine's Day, those of you who are watching on TV might notice that I'm not wearing my heart on my sleeve, but wearing my heart on my chest today, because it's always such a lovely day for people to celebrate Aroha Nui, which is lovely to be able to say Aroha. So let's start today by telling you a little bit about what's been going on at Cobblestones, and then I will let you know I'll also be playing some music, and I want to carry on the story of the Tale of Two Trunks, which is one of the exhibitions that we've got running at Cobblestones at the moment. I actually I told you half this tale a month ago, and this is the second half. Sorry it didn't come up 2 weeks ago, but we had the lovely Joseph Gillard in to talk about what the collections and exhibitions team do at Cobblestones and about their plans for the future. So I thought it would be okay to just skip the Tale of Two Trunks until this week. So before I do that, though, I want to play you a bit of music. So I thought, given that what we're talking about with Cobblestones is usually historical, something historical, we might play the Split Ends, History Never Repeats. It seems very appropriate somehow. So here we go, Split Ends, History Never Repeats. Hello, everybody. I hope that you heard some of that music. History Never Repeats from Split Ends. So back to the tale of two trunks, because history sometimes does repeat. The waves of immigrants who came through this country in the 19th and early 20th century, there were lots and lots of different people. And a month ago, I talked a bit about Lars Schue, who was a Danish immigrant who arrived in 1875. And Lars, we have his trunk in Cobblestones. So Lars arrived with just what he could bring in his trunk, and he was a very excellent. He was a really good settler. He did lots of things. He helped build the railway. He lived in a little whare like the one that we have on display in Cobblestones as part of the exhibition, and he was really one of the Danish immigrants were one of the most important settlers in clearing the land up around Morrisville. And it's worth going up there to see what's still there and to read more about it, as well as coming to Cobblestones, of course. The other settler that we talk about in this exhibition is Edward Collier and his family, because Lars Schue came on his own. He didn't ever marry, but Edward Collier came with his wife and two daughters. They relocated from a rural middle-class life in England to what was by that time a small, well-established English-speaking town, because the Small Farms Association had settled Greytown by then really thoroughly. The Colliers arrived in 1910, and they were able to bring with them a lot of household and personal items which would be of use in their new life in the Wairarapa. The thing about the Colliers that was in 1910, the year the Colliers arrived, 16,000 people born in the UK arrived in New Zealand. That was almost 40% of all arrivals that year. And many arrivals in New Zealand, like the Collier family, came from the southern part of England. And in fact, my husband's ancestors came from the southern part of England as well. We're not certain about why the Colliers came in 1910, but there were two major factors which may well have influenced their decision to start a new life. The decline in farming in Britain, brought about by the Great Depression of British agriculture and the expansion of farming in New Zealand, was one reason, because large export markets for New Zealand's produce were then well established. Edward Collier came from farming stock, and in 1910 was running a farm devoted to arable crops and cattle. But the farming in England was in the grip of a depression caused by a dramatic fall in grain prices following the opening up of the American prairies and the advent of cheap transportation with the rise of steamships. So it's amazing how transportation affects everything, because the transportation into the Wairarapa enabled the settlement of the Wairarapa, and that's one of the reasons that Cobblestones is where it is, because it was one of the transport hubs. Cheap imports of American wheat were flooding the markets and often undercut and overwhelmed British wheat farmers. There were also huge increases in imports of meat because, of course, by that time, New Zealand had had its first refrigerated shipments of lamb back to the UK, butter and cheese. By 1914, Britain was dependent on imports for 4/5 of her wheat and 40% of her meat. This depression accelerated Britain's rural depopulation. People were leaving the land to find jobs in the growing industrial cities. Of course, this is when the cities really started to grow. There are so many of the suburbs in London, particularly around North London, around Haringey, Highgate, all those places, where houses were being built, and lots of houses were built in between 1900 and 1925. Britain became the most industrialised major country, with the smallest proportion of its resources devoted to agriculture. British agriculture did not really recover from this recession until after the Second World War, whereas in contrast, New Zealand's fortunes were changing and the country was prospering after some years of depression. So the Collier story. They embarked from London on the White Star Line ship, the Ionic, a steam-powered ocean liner built in 1902 by Harland and Wolff in Belfast. Now, Harland and Wolff, of course, are a famous shipbuilder in Belfast. This Ionic ship could travel at a speed of 14 knots and carry up to 688 passengers, plus refrigerated cargo. Her route from London to New Zealand was Cape Town, and there were 4 passenger decks, electric lighting, and an open promenade deck. The ship also boasted a Marconi wireless set. The manifest listed 668 souls, 557 adults, 105 children, and 6 infants. Most were English, with a few Welsh, Irish, and Scottish. Fellow travellers of the Colliers included a cheesemaker, engineers, miners, policemen, cabinet makers, painters, and clergymen. And one of the exhibits in the exhibition at Cobblestones is one of the Collier children's diary, and she had an autograph book, and she got many of her fellow passengers to sign their autographs, which was very, of course, exciting. I mean, 8-year-old Marjorie, who was the one with the autograph book, she must have gone round all the passengers to get them to sign. And I suspect it was a very social time on the ship, with and exciting for 2 little girls to get to know all these different people. The Colliers had paid their own fares, travelling second class in a cabin at a cost of £38 per adult, the equivalent of, in today's money, $6,600. And Edward is listed as a gentleman. Their journey would have been relatively convenient and quite organised, with lots of things going on, and a far cry from the cramped and difficult conditions endured by earlier settlers such as Lars Schuh, who's the other part of this exhibition. And the voyage only took 50 days and arrived in Wellington in December 1910. So the Colliers then went from Wellington across the Rimutakas to Greytown, and they arrived by train, which of course Lars Schuh had helped build the railway line. The social life and community life in Greytown was expanding. Farming was expanding, refrigeration in ships was opening up overseas markets, and the secondary industry and services were growing. There were opportunities and jobs on offer, and New Zealand was especially keen to attract experienced farmers and farm workers. So by early 1913, the Colliers had settled. Originally, of course, Greytown had been bush covered, but it was by an established small town by the time they arrived, with a population of around 1,200 people. The economy was centred around dairy farming and fruit growing. It's kind of a bit like it still is today in many ways. The well-made streets were initially lit with coal gas lighting and later by electricity. By 1916, several residents drove motor vehicles, and the speed on Main Street was increased from 10 miles an hour to 12 miles an hour. There was water supply and a modern sewage system. The 3-mile train trip from Greytown took passengers to Woodside, and they could then take the train across the Rimutakas to Wellington or on to Masterton. There were plenty of opportunities for leisure, including 2 picture theatres. So it would have been very exciting to have come over the hill and settled in Greytown. Marjorie and her sister Fanny, the 2 girls, became really well known in the town, and they actually became really good tennis players, and they played golf a lot as well. So it obviously was quite a good social life in the town. I'm going to now play you another track. And this is a track from by a friend of mine called Alan Downs, he calls himself a recovering farmer. He was a hill farmer for most of his life on the sheep farms of the Hawke's Bay. And he decided that about 15 years ago that he'd had enough of farming, and he moved down to the city, to Wellington, and started writing songs. And Alan's songs are all about what life was like in the days of hill farming. So it's a great song. This one's called Monday. Alan Downs and his song about Mondays.
Monday always crashes your weekend. Complacency left shattered on the floor. Last night hasn't really left. This morning's already running late. The bus stop, they don't know if you ain't there. You fall out of bed last night, not yet a memory. Haven't had time to activate your mind. You wash your face, struggle to dress on autopilot, and reflex says Monday always takes you by surprise. Everybody's head is in their iPod. Everybody's eyes are on the floor. Monday is the interface between life and the human race. Monday is the hardest day of all. Tuesday is a lot like deja vu. There's a bathroom mirror looking back at you. Well, saints alive, I look a fright. Who did I think I was last night? Tuesday still has half of Monday to do. Wednesday you start to feel alive. You think you've got a handle on the vibe. Well, you even had time for 2 coffees before heading off to the office. Wednesday you can take it in your stride. By Thursday you think you're doing all right. You even managed to sleep right through the night. Well, the mirror looks back with a smile, and you haven't seen that in a while. Thursday you're on a high, you're on a roll. And then Friday comes in with a big yahoo! Yes! Who cares how much you've still got to do? 'Cause this is where the week will end. You'll have some of your own time to spend. Friday's got a way of getting out of control. But I love the weekend when I'm on the town. There is such a good vibe out there to be found. There's something on at the museum. There's 2 movies and a show to see, and a new restaurant opened up down the Strand. The weekend always stretches out of sight. The days run on well into the night. Sunday starts off about midday. Brunch slides down with a sunset. The evening dances all your cares away. And then Monday gate crashes crashes your weekend. Why does life have to be so unfair? Well, you've only just managed to get to sleep and you're waking you up to start the week. Monday's gotta be the worst day of the year. I love the weekend when I'm on the town. It's just so liberating, hanging around. Well, there's always something happening. I've got my own reality. If you're looking, Saturdays where I'll be found. So why don't we have 2 Saturdays? Take Monday right out of the page. We could sandwich Sunday in between the 2 best days of the week. Saturday could give Monday a good name. I love the weekend when I'm on the town. It's so liberating just hanging around. There's always something happening. I've got my own reality. If you're looking, Saturdays where I'll be found.
Mondays by Alan Downs. I don't know what it is about Mondays. Maybe it's because lots of us have managed to have 2 days off and spent the weekend enjoying ourselves. But there you go. Monday's always not a very popular day of the week, is it? So that was a bit about The Tale of Two Trunks, which is one of the exhibitions that we've currently got in Cobblestones. And it, for those of you watching on TV, I've just popped up a little bit of the information about the Tale of Two Trunks exhibition on the screen. It always strikes me how brave the immigrants were, whether they were coming from Denmark, going 6 months in a leaky boat, or 50 days on an ocean liner, not knowing what they were going to reach at the other end. And they all made themselves really extraordinary lives and really contributed to the New Zealand that we have today. And that's a lot of what Cobblestones is all about. It's about all the settlers, whether they were original Mana Whenua or came later than our Maori settlers came on the 7 canoes. They were very brave because they came across the seas. And I have to admit that when I came to New Zealand in 1983, it was a lot easier. It took me a while to get here because we actually had a week in Hong Kong, a week in Singapore, and a week in Australia on the way, because we thought, well, let's have a look at some of these other countries. But arriving in New Zealand was a lot easier for us as we came by plane and arrived at Auckland Airport and drove into the city straight away. It was really interesting. We've actually been up in Auckland last week saying goodbye to my stepson, my husband's son, who's off to live in Australia for a while. And it was, and we know that we will see him again in the not too distant future, we hope, because we'll go over there and visit him, or he'll come see us. But it made me think, gosh, imagine if I thought, gosh, I'll never see him again. And that's what the early settlers did. So Cobblestones is the story. We got 6 listed buildings in Cobblestones, heritage listed buildings in Cobblestones, and lots of bits and pieces, lots of articles that were used in early days and even right up until the 1920s and 30s. And that's what we try to use these articles to tell the stories of the early settlers, which is always, and it's always interesting to see how people come round the museum, react to some of the articles, and they look at them and say, oh, if they're about my age, often they say, oh, my great-grandmother had those, or my great-grandfather used one of those. one of those ploughs. I remember seeing that hanging around the farm. So it's always fun to see that. So do come and visit us soon. I'm going to play you another track now. I'm going to play you a track called Wanganui. And this is about some settlers in Wanganui. It's about the connection with the Wanganui River, which I think is kind of appropriate today, given the weekend that some of us have had, with lots of water around everywhere and rivers overflowing and bursting the banks. And the Wanganui, of course, is very important to that side of the country, to the west side. So I hope everyone on the west side is okay. So here's a track called Wanganui, written by Niels Gedge.
Last time I talked to the old one, she was stooped and almost gone. Knuckles big as marbles, but her eyes still shone. Said she's tired of living now, no reason left to stay. But she hadn't counted up all the love in her heart, or thought what we might say. Once she said there was a stream that danced over rocks down the mountain. It turned and it sparkled and it gleamed, carved out a name in the valley it was forming. And the settlers in the old river town, their hammers ringing in the sun. All the laughing girls and boys, there's plenty and hope for everyone. For everyone. Last time I saw the album, all the old familiars came back. The man whose firm fell over, she heard he dropped in his tracks. And the winking boy in the photograph, dueling Spitfires in the war. She listened every night for the 9 o'clock news and for bluebirds over Dover. And the river made rapids and pools deep in a fold in the ranges, picking up creeks in the trees that fell in. The storm blew wide in the heart of her island. Oh. Last time I went to the old river town, the family stood about, Mum read stones in the churchyard, spoke the words out loud, and the river took a dignified curve to the groin where it met the tumbling sea. There are bone white logs that played in the sand, and my uncle, he made Billy tea. Once she said there was a stream that danced over rocks down the mountain. It turned and it sparkled and it gleamed, carved out a name in the valley it was forming, and the settlers in the old river town, the hammers ringing in the sun, all the laughing girls and boys. There's plenty in hope for everyone, for everyone, for everyone. For everyone.
That was Wanganui by Niels Gedge, written about his grandmother's family, his maternal grandmother's family, who were one of the early settlers in Wanganui. And his grandmother, Niels's grandmother, was very influential in setting up the museum in Wanganui and collecting bits and pieces and making sure they were stored properly. And she was quite a character of the sounds, but I wish I'd met her. But unfortunately, she died some years before I met my husband. So I want to talk a little bit more about cobblestones now and about early transport to the Wairarapa, because we know that even now over the hill is a long and arduous journey. It can be. I'm sure it was yesterday and the day before. And can you imagine what it would have been like for those using horse-drawn transport? It must have been horrendous. Or even just walking over the hill, it took ages. Horses needed an overnight rest at the stables in Greytown. We didn't do changing. It wasn't like Cobb and Co, where they used to have teams of horses that they changed. What would happen is that the carriages would come into Cobblestones, the coaches would come into Cobblestones, and the horses would be uncoupled and they'd be brushed down and they'd be put into the paddocks beside the stables. The passengers and the driver would go across the road. There was a very nice hotel across the road where they would stay and have a rest before they started the next part of their journey. And in Greytown, that's why we have the cobbles. And the cobbles are the original cobbles that were there. So they've got a heritage listing on them to make sure so we don't drive on them and we look after them quite well. But one of the lovely things about cobblestones is that often groups will use it as a meeting place. And recently we had the Model T Ford Car Club come and bring some of their old cars. And it was lovely to see them at Cobblestones. For those of you watching on TV, I've just popped up on the screen a photograph of one of the glorious old Model T cars. This one is bright yellow, and there's two young visitors having a sit in it. But what struck me about the car club was how much fun the people had driving these old cars around. And some of them had come from the South Island to this annual meeting and tour of the car club. And they are intrepid venturers. They went all the way out to Castle Point on one day, and they went all the way out to Cape Palliser Lighthouse along the road. For those of you who know the road to Cape Palliser Lighthouse, it can be just a bit exciting sometimes. But I have heard that the reason they have narrow wheels is so that they don't get stuck in the mud. So that was why the narrow wheels and the narrow tires. And it was really a lot of fun to see them, and they had a really good time. There's some more pictures on TV, for those of you watching on YTV, of the collection of cars. There was about 45 of them. It was really extraordinary. And of course, they just fitted in with Cobblestones so well. So they had their AGM, and they did a tour of the town and a tour of Cobblestones, and had a really good time. And that's one of the joys of Cobblestones, is that we do get to have a lot of weddings. We get to have car clubs and other clubs having their meetings there. Because we're outside, we can have up to 100 people at a time, even under red status, which is really good, although I wouldn't have recommended an outside meeting this weekend. And we are hoping that we'll be able to have our planned events of music events maybe in March. We'll see how this status goes and see how the cases go. But hopefully in the not too distant future, we'll be able to have some. We're also planning a gin garden party on the 16th of April. That's Easter Saturday, after the grand Tweed ride around Greytown, where everyone gets dressed up in their best tweeds, gets on the bikes, and has a very leisurely ride around Greytown. Now, this is definitely not lycra on bikes, because it's not a fast ride at all. It's a leisurely ride where you can appreciate the lovely surroundings and the beautiful trees that are in Greytown. So that's on the 16th of April. And hopefully keep your eye on our Facebook page and see what else we can do. We're hoping to be able to do some other events before then, but we'll just have to wait and see. Now, as it's Valentine's Day, as I have been saying, and as I said, I'm wearing a heart on my chest today, although it's a blue heart, to celebrate. I thought that I might play a very famous love song, because as most of you will already know, I'm Scottish. I'm not New Zealand born. I'm an import myself. And I actually come from Ayrshire. I lived a lot of my childhood in Ayrshire. And that's where Robert Burns comes from, the poet Robert Burns. And one of his famous songs is My Love is Like a Red, Red Rose. And this rendition of it is by friends of ours called Michael McKinnon and Lynn Wilkinson. And I think they've done Rabbie proud with this edition of My Love is Like a Red, Red Rose. So here you go.
That's newly sprung in June, and my love is like a melody so sweetly played in June. And fair thou art, my bonny lad, so deep in love am I, and I will love you still, my dear, till all the seas gang dry, till all the seas gang dry, my love, and the rocks melt with the sun. Oh, I will love you still, my dear, those sands of time shall run. And fare thee well, my only love, and fare thee well a while, and I will come again, my love, though it were 10,000 miles. Though it were 10,000 miles, my love, though it were 10,000 miles, oh, I will come again, my dear, though it were 10,000 miles. And fair thou art, my bonny lad, so deep in love am I, and I will love you still, my dear, though all the seas gang dry.
My love is like a red, red rose. And I think that last line, and I will love thee still, my love, till all the seas gang dry, which is a lovely way of putting it. So, I'm almost coming to the end of the programme this week, but I just want to say a couple of things. At Cobblestones, we are open at the moment from 10 until 4, 7 days a week. That's right through until the 1st of June. And then we move to 4 days a week, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, Monday. But one of the things I want you to know is that we run almost completely by volunteers. We have one part-time administrator who does a grand job of looking after the place and organising the volunteers. But we are a trust, and we can always use more volunteers. And if you're interested in history, if you're interested in cobblestones, if you just want to come and have a good time and hang out with the volunteers, because we are a nice bunch and we have a lot of fun doing things together. If you're interested in old farming equipment or old carts or anything like that, there's always projects on the go. So there's a new project to do up another old cart, which you can come and have a look at in Cobblestones and see what we're going to be doing. And you can always get in touch with me through our Facebook page. That's a really easy way of getting in touch. And if you're interested in finding out about being a volunteer, then we would love to see you. Come and talk to us. And, you know, even if you've got 3 or 4 hours a month, that would be fantastic. Gardening, working on the catering team, helping with our open days, helping with our school visits, any of those things, it would be fantastic to see you. So I'm going to sign off today with another song. This is a song called It's Only Love in the End, and it's written by a New Zealand songwriter called Mark Laurent. This version is sung by Chris Priestley, and I hope you enjoy it, and I hope you all have a happy Valentine's Day. It's Only Love in the End by Mark Laurent.
It's only love in the end, that's all. It's only love in the end, that's all. There's just one thing in the end that makes any difference, my friend. It's only love in the end, that's all.
Once I was young, once I was small, but now I am none of these things at all. The world which seems so solid today, tomorrow could all fade away, leaving me nowhere else to fall.
We walk by faith, we live in hope, and sometimes there's nothing there to hold. Behind the dream of the world is a shadow moving of heaven. There is an answer if you call. It's only love in the end, that's all. It's only love in the end, that's all. There's just one thing in the end that makes any difference, my friend. It's only love in the end, that's all.
When the kingdom finally comes and every other cord is undone, it's only love in the end, that's all.
It's Only Love in the End, That's All, by Mark Laurent. A lovely song. So that's it, program from me for this week. I want to say thank you very much for listening. It's lovely to have your company, and I hope that I'll be here again with you in 2 weeks' time. So that's goodbye from me, Janette Wallace Gedge, and Cobblestones Chronicles.